Okay, so in the first video, we learned how to do the long tail cast on, and we got our 4 stitches on the needle. And if you have not already done this and cast on your stitches, please go back to video number 1 and learn how to do the long tail cast on to get 4 stitches on the needle. Now, in that first video, you might recall we had our needle in our right hand and we did our little slingshot with our left hand. So the needle was always in our right hand. Well, now what we're going to do is turn that needle around and we're going to hold it in our left hand. And we're going to pick up our other needle and we're going to hold it in the right hand. And you're going to want to push your needles down so that they're close to the end. You don't want to push it so far that they're going to accidentally slide off, but down to just before the needle starts tapering. And we are going to learn the knit stitch. You may have already heard that most of knitting is 2 basic stitches. The knit stitch and the purl stitch. And then all the other stitches are basically variations of the knit stitch and the purl stitch. So it's really important that you learn the knit stitch, and in this project we'll learn the knit stitch and variation of the knit stitch later on. We will not learn purl for this particular project. On our next project, which I haven't selected yet, but if people are still interested in continuing on and learning more about knitting, we'll choose another project and I will introduce the purl stitch in the next project. But for this project, we're going to focus primarily on the knit stitch and on a couple of little variations on the knit stitch. And so the first thing you need to do is figure out which piece of yarn is the tail and which piece of yarn that's hanging off the needle actually goes to the ball of yarn. And the yarn that goes to the ball of yarn is referred to as the working yarn. That is the yarn that you want to pick up, and you're going to be knitting with that working yarn. Don't accidentally pick up the tail yarn. It's a very common mistake that sometimes people will grab a hold of this yarn and start knitting with it, and then whoops, they run out of yarn because you only have a few inches of yarn there. So very important to grab the working yarn, which is the yarn that's still attached to the ball. And I am going to show you how I knit, and I am going to do a disclaimer here. The way that I hold my yarn is not the most efficient way to knit. The way that I hold my yarn is not incorrect. My stitches are properly formed and I am able to make lovely knitted projects, but it is not the most efficient way. If you want to learn a more efficient way, you should search on YouTube for the term continental knitting. How to knit continental. And if you want to learn how to knit faster than the way that I knit, that would be what I would recommend. But like I said, my method isn't incorrect, it's just not as efficient. I have always felt a little awkward with continental knitting. In continental knitting, people hold their yarn, they usually wrap the yarn around a couple of fingers and then they loop the yarn around the index finger, and when they form their stitches, they come through and they just kind of pick the yarn up with this needle and they pull it through. I've just never gotten the hang of it. So I do more of a wrapping technique, just because it's more comfortable for me. And again, it's slower. So it depends on how interested you are in being fast with your knitting. I'm going to show you the way I do it. I just basically grab the yarn with my 3 fingers, like the middle, ring, and pinky finger. I pick up that working yarn with those fingers, and then I let the yarn wrap around my index finger. Okay? And then to do a knit stitch, you take your right hand needle and you're going to insert it into the first stitch from the left hand side of that stitch and through it. And you'll see if you look at the back of this stitch, it comes out the right hand side of the back. So you're going in through the left hand side of the stitch and you come out on the right hand side of the back of the stitch. Okay? So it goes like this. And then I wrap the yarn around that needle and pull that loop of yarn that's on that needle through the front of that stitch. And then you just slide that off. Slide that stitch off. Now you can see, now I have 1 stitch on the right hand needle and 3 stitches on the left hand needle. Let's do that again. We're going to knit the second stitch. We're going to stick our needle into the left hand side of that stitch, and it's coming out the right hand side of the back. And you don't have to check that every time. You're going to get the hang of it so that you just know that you're coming out the right way. What you do want to avoid is you don't want to stick the needle in between the 2 stitches. You can see what that looks like. That would be incorrect. When you stick it through the left hand side, you really want to go through that loop so that your needle comes out the back on the right hand side of that stitch. Okay, so I've gone in through the stitch, wrap it, pull the yarn loop through, and just slide that stitch off. Now we have 2 stitches on the right hand needle, 2 stitches on the left hand needle, and we're going to do it again. Come in through the left hand side, poke your needle through, wrap the yarn around, and pull that loop of yarn through, and you're just going to slide that stitch off of the left needle. Now we have 3 stitches, 1, 2, 3 on the right hand side and 1 stitch on the left needle. We're going to stick the needle in through the left hand side of that stitch. There we go. Wrap it, pull that loop through, and slide it off. Now we have 4 stitches on the right hand needle and no stitches on the left hand needle. Now what do we do? First of all, before we do anything else, you congratulate yourself because you just knit an entire row of stitches. Congratulations, that is knitting. So we did 4 knit stitches. What we do from here is we take this needle that's in our right hand, we're going to turn it around so that now that needle is in our left hand. We're going to take the needle that was in our left hand and put it in our right hand, and we start over again. So that was row 1 that we did, and we look at our instructions and we see that for row 2 the instructions are knit 2, yarn over, knit across the row. So we're going to knit 2, which means knit the first 2 stitches. So we come in, you know how to do this, wrap it, pull it through, slide it off, and then from the left, grab the yarn, pull the loop through, slide it off. So now we've done the knit 2, and the next thing we're supposed to do is yarn over. So a yarn over just means you take that right hand needle and you come behind your working yarn and you just kind of let it rest over the needle. That's yarn over. That's all there is to it. And then we're supposed to knit across the row. So we just go into the next stitch and knit it like usual. Wrap it, pull the loop through, slide it off, come in this last stitch, wrap the needle, pull the loop through, and slide it off. Now, instead of having 4 stitches on the needle, you have 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if you're on the right track, you have 5 stitches. Okay? So we move that needle to the left hand and grab the other needle with the right hand. Grab our working yarn. Make sure you don't grab the tail yarn. And we're going to do row 2 again. The instructions say repeat row 2 until you have 44 stitches on the needle. So what is row 2? Knit 2, yarn over, knit across the row. So we're going to knit 2, one, two, and we're going to do our yarn over. And then this next stitch was the yarn over from the previous row, and you can see it's pretty loose. It's kind of loosey-goosey compared to the other stitches. That's okay. We're just going to knit into it just like we did the other stitches. Put our yarn in, or our needle in from left to right, wrap it, pull the loop through, and slide it off. Now we're just knitting until the end of the row. Keep doing the knit stitch till we get to the end. Okay, and if we stop and count, we should now be up to 6 stitches, right? So we got 2, 4, 6. All right, so we are just increasing by 1 stitch every row. I'm grabbing my working yarn. We're going to do it again. We're going to knit 2, and yarn over, and knit to the end of the row. Remember, when we get to the previous yarn overs, that's fine. We just knit into them like we knit into any other stitch. And we just keep that up. Now it looks a little strange at this phase, which is okay. We should have 7 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And we just continue to do this. I'll do, another couple rows on camera, and then I'm just going to pause the video, and I'm going to knit up more of this, so you don't have to sit and watch me knit the entire thing. But I am going to knit more of it and come back, and then we'll take a look at, what the project is looking like, and you'll be able to see a little bit about what you should expect as you move along. Okay, so I'll meet you back here in just a little bit. Okay. So I have continued to knit along. I got several more rows done, and I just wanted to pause here so we could take a look and see what the project looks like after you get a little bit done. So as you can see, a lot more stitches on the needle. We started with only 4 stitches, and now I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 23 stitches on. So as you can see, it's forming this triangular shape, and I'm going to stretch it out just a little bit here. You can see that we have this little eyelet pattern going around the edge of the washcloth, and this is exactly what you want to see. Okay, so we have a triangular form, eyelet pattern around the edge, and in the center here, it's just a series of ridges. When you knit on both sides of the work, so you knit on the front and then you turn around and you knit on the back, that creates a fabric that is referred to as garter stitch. So this is what garter stitch looks like. And we are just going to continue with your knit 2, yarn over, knit across the row until you count these stitches and you have 44 stitches on the needle. And then we switch to the next step in the process of knitting our grandmother's favorite dishcloth. So I wanted to show you, as you get further along in this project, it's going to get so that you have so many stitches on the needle that you really can't just stretch them out any further. I mean, I'm still able to at this stage, but it's getting a little cramped. And I just wanted to let you know that it's okay to scrunch these stitches right on up. It's okay to work your stitches like that on the needle. In fact, I encourage it because it helps you to keep your stitches at the end the way that you need them to be as you go along. In fact, I have a habit as I work of kind of pushing the stitches down as I go. It's a subtle movement, but it keeps those stitches right at the end of the needle, so that what you don't want is to get working along like this and suddenly your stitches are further and further away from the end of the needle. That's really not an efficient way to do it. So you want to keep, sliding those stitches down, sliding them down. Be very careful when you're sliding them down. Like I said before, you don't want to slide them so far that you actually have a stitch fall off like that. What I didn't share with you earlier is that all of these stitches that are on the needles are live stitches. And if you have a stitch fall off of the needle, that stitch can actually unravel the entire length of your project, all the way down to the bottom to the cast-on row. So you want to be careful that you don't let stitches just fall off the end of the needle. One common mistake is that when people go to make their knit stitch, they accidentally stick the needle in between the 2 stitches rather than getting it into that stitch. They get it in between the 2 stitches. And watch what happens. You wrap that yarn around, pull it through, slide it off, and you think you've got a stitch there. You've only done a yarn over, and you've lost this stitch. The stitch has fallen off of your needle. So you want to be very careful that you actually get your needle right through the stitch. Don't miss it and go in between 2 stitches. So that's just a little bit of a handy tip, and we're going to be back on the third video once we have 44 stitches on the needle. So I will see you then.